For me, this is not comedy, it's therapy. Brian Philip Mitchell has been a close enemy of mine for over 20 years. I first had the bad luck to run into him while auditioning for 12th Night at Sussex University. We were both going for the same role, Malvolio. Brian was determined that he should be given the part. It's me! He insisted in his piercing whine. At the time, I didn't know how right he was. Malvolio is utterly self-obsessed, pompous, self-deluded, and irredeemably vain. Unfortunately, despite Brian possessing all the necessary attributes for the role, he has no acting ability. None whatsoever. Unless you count inducing a bizarre cocktail of nausea, boredom, and anger in the audience. Someone here famously once said of him that on stage he casts out the net of approval but perpetually reels it in empty. I once drunkenly appealed to him to spare future audiences his grotesque heresies against entertainment in the now forgotten Casablanca nightclub. I was sure my altruistic pleading had done the trick, only to find I had inspired him to appear on stage twice as often, just as catastrophically, bringing disappointment, rage and ennui to new swathes of unsuspecting victims. However, this is far from the limit of Brian's inabilities. He is most famous for not being able to shut his face. Brian talked so much that when he visited Spain, he had to put suntan lotion on his tongue. His constant chatter, frequently on the most obscure and tedious subjects conceivable, has reduced many a listener to contemplations of suicide. Many is the time that I have blocked out his senseless witterings by imagining his death. I have seen his head crushed by a giant potato. I have seen him sit down to a meal where unknowingly he ate his pitifully small heart like a pistachio nut. And when he had realized what he'd done, snuffed it, his eyes abulged with terror. Many years ago, I became exhausted by his incessant ranting bellyache while watching an England game on television. I didn't talk to Brian for a year after that. It was the best year of my life. In the end, it seemed cowardly. I calculated that his other enemies were having to endure 3% more of him each week. So I went back to the cold face and took up my share of the drudgery. Even to the extremes of actually living with it. It was the worst year of my life. Imagine a man not so much humming as pom-pom-pomming, exquisitely out of tune, occasionally dressing up as the most astoundingly unpleasant woman you've ever laid eyes on. Dragging you off to smoke-filled cafes that don't sell vegetables, alternately complaining furiously that he hasn't been made king of the universe, and vexing you with vapid bilge about bark and larkin. I once wrote a part for him in a short film. The role cast him as a seedy, blackmailing pornographer who gets beaten to death with a baseball bat. Editing this section of the film was the sweetest, most enjoyable sensation I have ever experienced. His inability to see the world like a human extends to Christmas parlor games. In the name game, you all put scraps of paper with famous names on them into a hat. Someone takes out a name and has to get others to guess it by giving clues. Brian's idea of famous is perfectly ludicrous. He has the gift of uniting people in mutual disdain by putting in names like Steve Dorr M. Entwistle Chavington, the internationally renowned engineer of Burton-upon-Trent's third largest porcelain factory, which changed the course of the world forever. When he was single, just walking through Brighton with him could be trying. His face, when he spotted a pretty girl on the street, was enough to make you perform a reflex vomit. He made an expression as if he was a cat purring with delight crossed with a monk who's just seen his first vagina. It makes me want to paraphrase George Orwell. If you want a vision of satisfaction, imagine a boot stamping on Brian's face forever. Almost there. I began to fear the insane prophets of earthly doom were right when I heard that Brian had been involved in an orgy. God only knows what kind of demented tarts would willingly suck on Brian's hairy potato face, his tweed jacket smelling of Rothmans, wee-wee and stale Mansfield sweat. Well, I suppose he's an inspiration to the millions of bombastic, hideous freaks all over the globe, all looking for some action. If Brian were a top trumps card, and by God can he trump incidentally, it's enough to make your heart stop. CF the calves with no vegetables. I think you can guess what his top trump scores might be. Social graces, nil. Knowledge of obscure and pointless facts, 10. Ability to hum a tune, nil. Ability to talk louder and more forcefully so that nobody can get a word in edgeways, 10. Repaying money lent, nil. Persecution complex, 10. Grumbling and carping skills, 10. Dressing like a Victorian who thinks he's an Edwardian, 10. Attractiveness in drag, minus 400. I leave you with this image. As Jason mentioned, when Brian was a child, he dressed himself up as Hitler, complete with toothbrush moustache. Even Hitler didn't do that. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Happy 40th birthday, Brian.